Good day to you. This is Anagalactic on Sunday, the last Sunday of June 2026. It's been quite a ride. This month marks the 4 year anniversary of AE, which I always call Anagalactic to spell it out. The original intention of this channel was to expose a very simple geometry, and that was done rather swiftly. However, there was a second reason for opening this channel on YouTube, at which platform I had no existence. I didn't even know if I could do it. It turned out to be quite easy to set up a channel. I believe YouTube is quite generous with the public. It is a money-making operation, one has to confess, and so I would say that they're a good service to the scientific community in the most general sense. I certainly fit in at the most general sense of the edge. I'm not really a scientist. I mean, one has to admit of a default definition of that word when it's used in its most common usage, that I do not fit that category in any way except in the broadest sense of scientist. And this has been such a pleasure to be at this station. Now, I'm not signing off. This may sound like, and so it's been a wonderful trip, and now, I'm going to fly off in a helicopter crying or whatever. People throwing flowers and garlands as I depart for precincts unknown. No, that's not what's going on as far as I know. No, I actually am in full swing and I'm having a blast. I have had a good time every year for 4 years. I produce practically daily. In order to produce 1,700 videos in 4 years, you have to keep at it pretty steadily. Fortunately, I am retired, but without talking too much about me, I would like to simply summarize where this has led and where we're at now and what we can expect in the future. And first of all, just to overture to my listening audience, thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, whoever is listening right now. It means a lot. I speak from a personal point of view, a subjective point of view. I am human and I do have feelings. And I'll tell you what, it's what keeps me going really on the other side of the analysis fence. Really, what you have to do in science is analyze the content, which I'm getting around to summarizing here in a moment. But in my usual approach of having bracketing information, here at this celebratory moment in history, our common history, this is the last Sunday in June, and I began this channel 4 years ago exactly in this month. What I would like to say to begin with is that I did not know for certain how this would turn out. This has been a layered project which has gained layers that I did not specifically surmise might come my way. Because at the simplest level, I was exposing a geometry. I didn't even know what I know now about the classification of the geometry that I discovered, as I claim, that it is called an intrinsic geometry. When I began, I did not know that term. It was actually taught to me by the Google search bot, which has a name. I always forget what it is, but it's some genial name, and genie certainly applies to those things. It's almost as if the thing has a personality. I can understand why people are philosophizing about AI and, along with the consciousness and reality circuit. These are human topics, and it's invaded science. No, it's always been in science. We overlap between what we need as humans and really how we concentrate on scientific data and facts and knowledge, which is not necessarily human. Certainly bombs and guns are not human. We could walk into the philosophy room and talk about that. Aren't they really human? Well, that's not what I mean. What I mean is human in the good sense. Humans don't fight wars. Humans aren't politicians. Humans don't hate. Of course they do, but they shouldn't. And that's a human issue. And science will never in any way figure out why there is war and hatred and injustice. And you could say evil and sin and unrighteousness and start using a bunch of religious words. But we are human, and humans do get religious because, from a certain point of view, you don't have any choice. And I have covered the fact that over the past a century and a half, that's fair, there has been a new movement completely unknown to the world before a century and a half ago. It rose in England, merry old England. You could say it started with Charles Lyell, the great geologist who changed the concept of geology from thousands of years according to the Bible to millions of years according to the universe. And then Charles Darwin and a man named Russell and quite a few others to follow capitalized on the new millions of years framework, which was brand new. That's something I think a lot of you youngsters are completely unaware of. That it was only yesterday, just a finger snap ago. A century and a half is not that long. We're talking about 1860, really Charles Lyell was about 1830 is a good peg point. But that was the introduction of millions of years geology. It's even hard for me sometimes to fully recollect consciously that that's when it began. That in the 18th century, that is the 1700s, nobody talked about millions of years anything, because it's obvious that the human race certainly has not been around that long. The human race can only trace itself back to about 10,000 years at the most, at which point it disappears. And that's never changed. The human race appeared on this earth less than 10,000 years ago. That is a fact that has been proved, but you see, it was in no need of proof before Charles Lyell and Charles Darwin. Both named Charles, both in England, contemporaries, friends, collaborators. They actually were co-conspirators. Oh yeah, Charles Darwin had a very rough time in publishing his book, and actually he was late. Very much, I would say, in this sense, like Sir Isaac Newton, was simply for whatever reason, in his case it wasn't fear of the church, it was more that he was so busy with alchemy and the Bible. Sir Isaac Newton was a student of the book of Revelation. He was a Christian, although a very, I would have to say, not atypical for his age, but from a modern point of view, very strange Christian. Well, aren't we all strange in our own way? But he delayed publication of the calculus, and it almost cost him his prerogative, which he wasn't that concerned about, or he would have published sooner. But it was England. Oh, his cohorts he was a member of a club. The gentlemen of England who are so educated and forwarding civilization. A lot to be said for that, although there's a downside, as there always is in England, as there always is in Europe or anywhere else where there are human beings in numbers. You're going to find all those religious words, sin, unrighteousness, and the breaking of the commandments, lying, cheating, and conspiratorial work. So Sir Isaac Newton didn't worry about conspiring to get his work approved, but Charles Darwin had to do that. Because he was at the cusp of a change of age where the Catholics' rule over the emerging nations of Europe, they were losing their grip, which they had had a stranglehold on the entire continent of Europe for 1,000 years. A stranglehold, a satanic stranglehold, and nobody, not even irreligious people or people who don't care for words such as angel or Satan, they fully bow the knee to the goddamned Catholic Church was satanic by any definition. And that was passing off the scene in the rise of, I'll just say, things such as great movements which could be called the Industrial Revolution. That was in full swing, of course. And this magnificent change in the way, I'll just say, white people, that is, white people, but not Russians, the white people of Europe, which by that time there were by then white people in America and other parts of the British Commonwealth were white. These are Europeans, they're white. Very tiny percentage, well, it's about 1.5%, that is 15% of human beings at any one phase of history, including the present day. 15% have skin color, really you should say a phenotype, that's similar to mine. I'm exclusively European, except there were a lot of Native American infusions into our lineage on my mother's side. Several, in fact, uncountable. We had a lot of activity with the Native Americans in terms of conjugation for the next generation. To put it in extremely polite terms, we are not at my stage of our Miller-Monroe ancestry. I am not pure European. And who cares anyway? Well, it is interesting, though, that nobody had ever thought that the Earth was older than a few thousand years. Nobody around the world, wherever you go, beginning, about 2 centuries ago, ask anybody, how old is not so much the Earth, which is kind of mysterious, I think anybody would have to admit, but how old is the human race? How long have humans been here? And this leads back into the topic at hand. What have I been doing on YouTube for 4 years? I just want to complete what I was saying, but that's where I'm headed. I'm addressing that part of this presentation on the anniversary of Anagalactic as I approach my 2000th video. Why am I doing that? Well, one of the reasons I'm doing that is for myself. And that was the prime directive. I talked it over with myself. I planned this out. Not inordinately, but I'll just say I spent about a week researching YouTube, but mostly considering what was motivating me to do this. What was my purpose? Because I've learned, as I think we all learn in our own way, that you should have a goal. When you set yourself out a task, you should have a way of determining when you're done, which in science means you get a solution. Unless you're just doing research, which is what we do 99% of the time to catch up. In which case you're not attempting to get a solution because you don't even know what the problems are. So what you're trying to do is learn what we've already learned as a group of scientists who pool our knowledge. So you catch up, which means education, whether self-education or otherwise. But why was I making a YouTube station, which is still in operation? I think that requires, or at least solicits, some explanation. For instance, why do I want you to tune in? Well, I don't want your money. And we'll return to that subject of why I'm glad that you tune in. But I first want to complete this thought about what is it that science is actually after? I just wish to offer a perspective, which won't be the only possible perspective, but which I've found to be among the very top perspectives to adopt. Where are we from? Where are we from? Either as an individual, which makes it personal, which is, I think, a valid question, but that's not what I mean. I mean, where is the human race from? And not even that, because that involves us in an involution. Because you're looking at yourself, even as a race. I'm part of the race of humans. But you're looking at yourself. There's a specific level of problematic involvement in there, which I simply summarize as involution. That's not what I mean precisely, although all these things are interlocked, of course. But what is the right aspect on science? Its origins. But which origins? There's the origin of the Earth, the solar system, the galaxy, the universe. There's the origin of the plants and animals. Ding, stop right there. That's it. That's correct. I'm a teacher and I'm telling you. Although this is somewhat idiosyncratic. This is my method. I've been careful right here to point out this is my system that I think is better than anyone else's system. Better than anyone else's system. No argument. No context except the top context of what I introduced. What the hell are we doing at all? And then narrow it down. This is a science channel. What are we doing as scientists? As a group, as individuals, communicating, hoarding knowledge, gaining understanding? What's it all for, Alfie? Well, you don't have a purpose, which means you don't have a goal unless you know the origin. When did this start? In order to answer even what, where, or when, well, you have to start somewhere with what, or where, or when. In the case of origins, when. Although there's also a where, we want when. Well, it was on this planet. I don't think anybody in the wildest imaginations argues with that. So the human race, that is humans, whatever color their skin, whatever their phenotype, where did humans originate? Now, the best way to approach that, according to my recommended approach to the topic of science in general, which I'm addressing now, isn't it better to study the ecology? Where did it come from? Yes, that is correct. No question about it. I'm saying so. So let's go on. Science is about the ecology. It's not about the stars, the moon, the galaxies, the universe, the ether. It's not about anything other than this earth. And that is so commonsensical. That is so obvious that anybody who thinks otherwise is not really doing it right in the perspective department, which means you're not going to get the right goal because you're not going to have the right orientation. We don't want to focus on humanity because it involves an involution, but we do need to focus on origins and not the sun, not anything larger, nothing in the heavens. We're actually not interested in the moon, although here's our old deviltress, our old devil moon, just floating around here. Let's get a good look at her. This is how I like to open a lot of videos, the moon. So let's get her out of the way here. Thank you, Luna. I just wanted to mention that I'm not against the moon. But when you're orienting yourself towards humanity, towards science, towards reality, toward yourself, towards consciousness, towards truth, towards solutions, towards what the hell are you doing, you don't start with the moon. Because you're just denying reality if you do that. Now it fits. And you know that this is a two-sided issue called heaven and earth. Very simple. I don't care if you're an atheist. I don't care if you're a Mormon or a Catholic. I don't care if you're a witch doctor. I don't care if you're evil or good. There's heaven, which is what we can't touch because it's above the atmosphere. And there's earth, which is the solid ground under our feet and the ecology that magically appeared here. I don't care about your fucking religion. I am talking about reality. There is an ecology, and it requires address, okay? Now, a human being is composed differently than the animals. The animals, some of the upper echelon mammals, certainly the primates, who even look like us, they have faces very similar to ours, suggesting what Darwin ended up suggesting, which I'm sure you're aware of. Well, since we look like monkeys, that's where we came from. That's a reasonable theory. But what I'm talking about, it doesn't even matter if that's true at the basis, at the orienting perspective, which you must adopt. And you must be able to articulate what you're doing, or you're not being honest. So what does a scientist do who's at the top, who's the best, who's doing the right thing? Well, first of all, you have to define what you mean by that. I say we're not to study heaven, we have to study earth first. For the reasons I just gave. Unless you know where you're from, you don't know anything that you're going to be able to share that matters. I just am putting that out there because I'm right and everybody else is wrong in this ultimate context. That's what I've been doing for 4 years, is orienting myself to my fellow scientists, and now I can. And I'm not going to get megalomaniac here, and I'm going to try to suppress my natural instinct to be pretentious because of what I'm up against demands it. But no, it doesn't. I should be diplomatic. I was raised to be a diplomat, and I intend to at least attempt to stay diplomatic because that's what a scientist does. You're the creme de la creme of humanity, much higher than any politician, much higher than anyone in any church. You're the leader if you're me. In other words, if you're doing it right, you're training to be a leader, a guide. The person who makes the decisions because they're the most accurate decisions. So how do you do that? Well, I found out, so I'm going to share it with you now and attempt to lower the tone in my voice and my tenor. It's not about heaven, that comes later. Although it's the most important aspect, let me just give you a spoiler. I'm all about heaven, astronomy, astrophysics, cosmology, religion, the gods, the angels, the devils, the demons, Satan, Yeshua, Muhammad. I'm all about that. Buddhism, Hinduism. What did the Chinese find out? What did the natives all over the world discover about heaven? What did they find out? What was their answer to where we're from? How did they decide where the ecology came from? That's the first question a full-grown scientist has to answer. You have to address that first. Nothing else. Not heaven. You have to decide and make it stick and risk your life for it and defend it. Whether right or wrong, you have to do this first, and it will determine what you are as a scientist and as a human being. Where is the ecology from? You can address that in several ways. I've narrowed it down to 3, but let's cut to the chase. When did the ecology appear on Earth? Multiple choice, and you're going to take this now as a quiz, and because I'm going to give you the answer. This isn't an exam. That's cruel. This is a quiz, which is generous. It's to force you to think before I give you the answer, because this is critical. I'm putting this right at the top of the list, and I'm leaving it there forever, because I discovered this. Now, I discovered it for myself, but it applies to you because I say so. You need to decide when on a timeline going into the past, when did this ecology, do we need to define that? I trow not. You know what the ecology is, although it is certainly worth defining, and in fact, must be defined. Because it turns out, according to the Polya method, which I adopted because I'm at the top, I know everything about how to do science now. I say so. And I will make it stick, and I will debate with anybody. You come up against me, you're going to the floor. All this is an orientation, so let's not get dramatic, although I do like to get dramatic. I'm quite emotionally involved after 4 years of doing what I've been doing, which is what? That's what I'm getting to. So you have to answer the question, first of all, if you want to be a scientist at all. And I don't see any qualifiers, actually. There are a few. I'm one, obviously. But I may be the only one who does this. You must. Not maybe, not if, and, or but, there's something. No. Right away, top of the list. When did the ecology of Earth appear on Earth? When? Give it a year. Give it a bracket. Within 1,000 years. Within 10,000 years. Within 5 trillion years. When? Exactly when? to the best of your knowledge, when did the ecology appear on Earth? And I swear I am practicing to be in a debate with some other so-called scientists, which is the next phase. Over the next 4 years, I'm making this announcement. My primary goal will not be explicitly to extend what I've been doing, which has been continuous and continuously excellent. But there's a new vector which now rises to the top. I must be interviewed. It's time. And here is my introduction to giving my own credentials, patting myself on the back, because I'm not a scientist. I'm not affiliated with any educational institution, any industry, any aspect of science. I have nothing to do with science, except what comes out of my mouth or appears on this screen. I was in the industry in a peripheral sense. I've been a programmer for most of my adult life. That's how I made my bread and butter. And most of that time as a programmer, as time went on, was as a database programmer, which is even more removed from mainline science, but it is part of science. In other words, I'm not a stockbroker like Eric Weinstein. I'm a real scientist in that sense, but that's very limited. Come on. I'm not a nuclear physicist. I barely even knew calculus when I started this channel. And I could go on about my credentials. They're none. I have no credentials except the truth and a good heart and to do what scientists actually do. And I say I'm the only one actually doing it. So what would you do if you wanted to be a real scientist like me? You would do what I did, or what I learned it to do. I don't want to sound too pretentious here. This is an empirical development of a single man. I'm only speaking for myself. I'm trying to make it sound universal because it is, because I say so. So on my own authority, with nothing to back me except logic and truth. You start by asking yourself, and you're not done until you get the answer. When did the ecology appear on Earth? When did this fantastic system, incredibly complex, involving animals and plants, and including human beings, you have to throw that in. Human beings are not exactly an afterthought. Although in the Genesis record, they are an afterthought. And in fact, in rational logic, what we can actually prove about the ecology and human beings who appeared to be overlaid on the ecology were an afterthought. So science and religion are in agreement about how humans fit into the ecology. We absolutely fucking do not. We have nothing to do with the ecology, except one very important aspect. It feeds us. It supports us. But we have no part in it. The animals and plants do. Although it can't be proved like ticks and lice, but oh yeah, they're part of a system that works. We're not part of that system, and nobody has ever been able to introduce humans into the equation of the ecology. All of which is to say that we're simply, for convenience and simplicity, excluding humans from the primary question. We will certainly get to humans because that's much more important to us as humans because we are humans and we're part of the equation whether we like it or not. But in order to begin logically, to begin correctly, and I'm telling you how to begin correctly, and there's no other way to begin correctly. Only my way is the right way to begin. You begin with the ecology and you exclude humans. You don't care about humans. What you care about are the higher order animals. That is the mammals, including the sea mammals, including the whales, that is the cetaceans. You care about the higher order animals because they're the most developed. They are the largest, they have the most number of cells, they're the most complex creatures in general. But then it becomes far more fascinating and engaging because you have not only mammals, you have fish, which are not mammals. You have birds, which are not mammals. And then you have amphibians, you have reptiles. You also have the kingdom of insects. You have the whole Linnaean classification system, which is so fantastic that you'll never understand it, and no man ever will. For one thing, there are over 1 million species of animal. Did you know that? That means including the insects, etc. Anything that's not a plant. But there is also the kingdom of the fungi, which are neither plants nor animals according to a certain fairly reasonable classification system. And there are also small creatures, that is the one-celled organisms. This is basically 4 kingdoms of life. There are the animals, and then there are the plants. That's how I was raised, but there are 2 others, the single-celled organisms, which don't reproduce sexually, and the fungi, which tend to have psychoactive drugs, psychoactive chemicals in them, and they appear all over the world, which introduces an extremely engaging angle on the combination of the ecology with the human race. May have a lot to do with those fungi. I do not exclude that. However, I do consider it at this stage of my development to be complete shit. And anybody who's interested in that, you're simply out of the game. And God bless you. May you discover something about the connection between fungi and human consciousness. I follow it. I'm very interested in it. But you're not doing what I'm doing. You're not one of the big boys. You're playing with yourself at a very high level, which I admire. But that's all you're doing. You're not doing what I'm doing. And if you're not doing what I'm doing, you're not doing anything. It's too late in the game. You actually have to get aboard. So I am a guide. I'm a leader. I am the man now. There it goes. So let's complete the thought. When did the ecology appear on Earth? When? Well, the right way to address that, just as if you knew nothing, just as if you had never heard of the Bible, if you have heard of it, and just as if you'd never heard of Darwin, if you have heard of Darwin. Erase all that, or you're not doing it right. You have to be unbiased. That's what it means. You know shit about Darwin. You know nothing about speciation. And you know nothing about God or Jesus or the Bible or Noah or your fucking Mormon church or whoever you worship against the will of heaven. I don't give a fuck what you do with your religious life. But you cannot drag it into science. Let me tell you something, Darwinist. You can't drag in your fucking Darwinist theories either. If you're going to keep out the Bible people because you hate their guts, they hate your guts too. Drop it! When did the ecology appear on Earth? Multiple choice. Within the past 10,000 years. B. Within the past 100,000 years, but more than 10,000 years ago. C. More than 100,000 years ago, but less than millions. D. More than millions, that is tens of millions of years ago, the ecology appeared on Earth. E. More than tens of millions of years ago, hundreds of millions of years ago. F. Billions of years ago. Which is it, wise guy? This is the only right way to begin, because now you have an attack strategy to get the solution, and you have to solve this first. There's a lot more ahead, but you have to begin here. What's the time frame? Was it thousands of years ago, tens of millions, or billions? Let's make it 3 choices. I think given that choice, most scientists today, of white scientists, with their European or American or Canadian or Australian, wherever the British rapists put white people unnaturally. Got that? Yeah, I hope you get that much. This is an adult station. You better keep up with what I say, because I make no fucking mistakes. How long ago did the ecology appear on Earth? Was it under 10,000 years? Was it more than 10,000 years, but less than 100 million years? I think if you were to back the Darwinists into a corner, they would probably go with tens of millions of years. But I think a certain percentage of them, if the trend is still being followed, would wonder, they'd scratch their nuts. They would wonder if they're going to lose funding by giving the wrong answer to a crazy man like me. They would probably grudgingly say, maybe hundreds of millions of years ago. I think the top dogs, who just know everything about biology, and I'll never catch up with them, they go, oh, my dear young fellow, well, it was about 1 billion years ago, but there's no more I can tell you because you're too stupid and untrained. But the right answer, and now go away and leave me alone, about 1 billion years ago, it kind of began. That sound like science to you? So how long ago was it really? That begins a legacy. You cannot bring in religion, you cannot bring in Darwin. Darwin is dead. If there's such a thing as speciation, you're going to have to rediscover it on your own so you can prove it. You're Darwin. Unless you know what Darwin knew, at least, you can't quote Darwin. You're a cop-out. You're a coward. How do you know the fucking animal's speciated? Just because Darwin said so? Then you're not a scientist. You're a choir boy. Oh, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Now what about the religious nutcases? The goddamned Protestants. Mostly in America and England, but it's all over Europe. Oh, sola scriptura. It says right here in Genesis, and Jesus approves this. Jesus says, and then you just, is in Genesis 9. Come to our church and bring your fucking wallet. It's Jehovah's Witnesses, my fucking ass. So you can't do that. You can't thump your fucking Bible. I'm sorry. I'm the greatest Bible scholar probably of modern times. So I have a right to tell you the way it is, bitch. You cannot thump your Bible. You're a young earth creationist? Fuck you. But are you a flood geologist? That's a little different. Now we're talking about scientific evidence. Young earth creationists are out of their fucking minds. They say they're Christian, they're not. If you're violating the laws of physics in the name of God, Jesus, and the Bible, then you're dangerous. And I say so, and I'm the top authority on that subject. You think you're gonna crucify me? Come and get me, bitch. I'm well beyond your little crybaby. It's in the Bible! Wah! But if it's not in physics, then your Bible is lying. And I've covered that as well in a few rather notoriously controversial videos. But I am Muslim, and I have a right to my opinion on the fucking Bible. On which, don't forget, I'm the only man who actually knows anything about that book. In all of Christendom. And definitely in all of Islam. The Islam people, the Islam culture, which has been around for over 1,000 years, by the way, very successful. I love it. I am Muslim. They know nothing of the Bible. You know why? Because the Jews wrote it. The entire Bible is by Jews. Well, that's... the Islam people aren't being fooled by that. But in Europe and America, under the Catholic rule, everyone is fooled who has skin color statistically. This nation used to be Christian. Well, that's not necessarily a compliment. Anyway, we don't want to get into religion. That's the human side, and we're kind of off topic of when did the ecology appear on Earth? I have the right answer, and it's the only right answer. Now, you have to discover this for yourself, or you're not a scientist. You can't believe me just because I raised my voice or announced some bogus credentials. But I will tell you the truth, and I'll live and die by that truth, and you can fuck yourself if you don't like it. You can turn me off any time, but I will not adjust myself to your stupid needs. I am telling you the way things actually are. So how long ago did the ecology appear on Earth? Well, the only right answer, according to science, is less than 10,000 years ago. There was nothing on the earth before that except rock. Except rock. There was nothing on the earth before 10,000 years ago. No ecology, no life, no nothing. But there was a rock called Earth. That is, we call it the third rock from the sun, which is kind of sweet and gooey. The third rock from the sun, you could say that, although you're not being scientific, you're being human. Well, let's be human too. You don't have much choice, so go along with it sometimes. It's quite an art. So here, we'll just say 10,000 years ago. Because the important thing about saying 10,000 years, was it 8,000 or 7,000 or 6,000? Ho! When you say 10,000, that's an order of time. It means it's no more than 10,000. Very important to begin to answer your question to get the solution. And if you don't get the right answer, you're out. I'll throw you out. I will. Better hope I don't get authority to do that or you're all canned. So, what's the right answer? Well, the provable answer, the answer that all real scientists know, and there's quite a few of us now, it's less than 10,000 years ago the ecology appeared on Earth by magic. It was magic. And that's part of science. Magic is definitely part of science. Newton knew that. All real scientists know that. And you just try to push it into the background, because if you're invoking magic like, well, God said, no, you don't. No, you don't. No, you don't! Because you can't prove that. It doesn't matter if it's in a book. You can't prove that. So it wasn't what it says in Genesis. Although, we'll come back to that. There's a reason there is Genesis 1 and 2 and 8 and 9, the most important parts of the Old Testament. Remember, I'm the foremost scholar and authority on the Old Testament. The Jews have no idea of the value of that book that was put in their possession for so long, which they ruined. And that's known. I didn't need to prove that. That is known. But we don't want to get anti-anything, do we? Oh, God, no. It might offend the living Israelis. Jesus, we don't want to do that. They're too busy committing genocide. Right? Okay. So we're not going there. This is one of the reasons we don't want to start with human origins. Humans are kind of... let's just leave that out of the picture. Oh, the ecology is a system which works perfectly. It's miraculous. And that's where science begins. That's why we have science, is because the ecology appeared by magic and it works miraculously. But what's really miraculous about the way the ecology functions perfectly, from day to day and year to year and thousands of years to thousands of years, how come it doesn't just, wither or rot or just be destroyed? How come it's so persistent and so fragile and delicate and beautiful, and yet there are 1 million species of animals and 1 million species of plants? Where did that come from? The right question is when, because then you can find out where, both in the sense of how it got here, which is sometimes implied by where. Where did it come from? You're asking, how did it get here? It's kind of like when you ask why, you're very often asking how. But what we want is basically to answer first, when did the ecology appear here? No longer ago than 10,000 years. That's been proved. And if you don't know that, or you have some fanny ache, you get your fucking lazy ass up and start doing some research into flood geology. I know it's the Christians. You're going to have to hold down your vomit, and you're going to have to grit your teeth and clench your fists because you hate God, you hate Jesus, you definitely hate the religionists, you fucking hate the Bible, you want nothing to do with those creeps. Neither do I, and I pity you. But they do know the flood geology correctly. And they're the only ones that are permitted to publish. Mainline white scientists are not allowed to talk about the flood, even though it's in Wikipedia. Look it up. I already told you you have to read Tom Wolfe's book, The Kingdom of Speech. If you don't, you'll never catch up with me. You'll never be a man. You'll never be a scientist because you'll never be able to answer the only question that you must answer. How did the ecology get here? First of all, it was less than 10,000 years ago. So that's a fact which you will not question. If you need to question it, you're not going to question it to my face. You go and find out what I know because it's what the universe says. So if you don't figure it out, you're not qualified because you're not intelligent enough. I know this hurts. Nobody wants to be called a retard. And really, this is what comes up. You either get to rise in the ranks of intelligent people until you get to my level, the very top. And people, it's not just me alone. Don't think I'm Napoleon. But I worked hard to get where I'm at. So this is the result of all my research. I'm summing up. It's not just 4 years of effort, although I've made magnificent strides in the last 4 years. So this has been a success. My channel has been a total success for me. But it's also been a total success for science, except I'm surrounded by idiots. So that's what's fueling this emotional content. And I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. I'm right, and you need to listen to me. Period. That's how it works in science. It is megalomaniac. Because it's the truth. If it's the truth, it's not megalomaniac, okay? Just because the Earth is turning on its axis, and some people still think, no, it's a golden chariot that flies at high velocity around the Earth on a 24-hour basis. Somebody has to take that person by the scruff of the neck and grab them and shake them in front of the children and say, ditch, 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 this is a retard. And throw them out. And then if there's prosecution, there's criminal, you threw someone out of your classroom because he said the sun flies through the sky in a golden chariot. Somebody has to do that. Doesn't make any difference what the government says. This is about truth. This is about what humans need. You're either telling the truth or you're on the wrong side. I tell the truth. So that's the truth. So we've gotten our first orienting perspective. Where is the ecology from? Well, you need to be specific. When did it appear? Less than 10,000 years ago. How can that be proved? Flood geology. Flood geology. Flood geology. Now, it's an interesting thing about the flood. When was the flood? The ecocidal flood that destroyed all life. That's in Wikipedia, by the way, but they date it wrong. They say that the flood that destroyed the dinosaurs, that's in Wikipedia, it destroyed the dinosaurs. When I was growing up, it was thought that the dinosaurs were destroyed by volcanic activity. That's been disproved, and nobody argues that anymore. No, the dinosaurs were buried by an ecocidal flood due to a comet strike. It might have been an asteroid. I just call it a comet because it sounds nicer. Technically, it's probably an asteroid, but it could have been a comet. About 15 kilometers in diameter, struck in the Chicxulub Basin, now the Caribbean Sea, and flooded out, just destroyed all the dinosaurs. Now, was it 100% of the ecology of Earth that was destroyed by that flood? Wikipedia says it was probably more than 75% of all the species, and that was before the flood. So there was an ecology here before the flood that was wiped out. And if it wiped out 75% of the species, then what happened after the flood would have been the continuing speciation with what was left of the former ecology. Now that's well known, but it's dated to 65 million years ago. That's 65 million years ago. That's been disproved. No, it wasn't 65 million years ago, and Wikipedia is wrong. Because I say so. So they're wrong, and there's no argument because I say so. No, it wasn't 65 million years ago. Well, how long ago was it according to flood geology? It was less than 10,000 years ago. The Grand Canyon proves that. The Colorado Plateau proves that. The Himalaya Mountains prove that. The sedimentary rock layers covering all the continents proves that. And the circumantarctican current that snapped the trans-Antarctican Andean chain at Drake's Passage in south, that is another proof that there was a cataclysmic flood less than 10,000 years ago. There's limestone at the top of Everest. And so Charles Lyell had something up his ass. He simply didn't know anything about sedimentary geology. When you're talking about geology, you're either talking about the original rock, which is definitely about 4 billion years old, or you're talking about the sedimentary layers, which cover all the continents. That's geology. That's what you need to look at. And then you discover there's no way that those sedimentary layers could have gotten there by any other method, despite what Ranger Rick says, despite what all the textbooks say. It did not take millions of years. It took much less time than that, because sedimentary layers are laid down exclusively by gigantic movements of water. And that alone describes the Grand Canyon. And if anybody tells you otherwise, punch them. I mean verbally. Don't ever use your fists. And by the way, the reason I'm wearing these gloves is not because I worked out with a punching bag this morning. It's because I have arthritis. And this actually relieves some of the, well, it's agonizing. Don't get arthritis. Don't grow old. No, that's not, I don't mean that. So that's actually what happened. So that produces a distinct problem, because now there are two ecologies. And that is in Wikipedia, because in the previous ecology, before the ecocidal flood, there were dinosaurs. Dinosaurs. What do you know about dinosaurs? Why did they die out? Why aren't there dinosaurs now? Didn't some of the dinosaurs survive the flood? Apparently not. Well, what happened to the dinosaurs? They were swept away by a cataclysmic flood of water and buried into sedimentary layers, and that's how we got the petroleum fields. And you won't read that in any textbook, except certain select textbooks among the creation research scientists. These are not young Earth scientists. Young Earth creationists are out of their fucking minds. They're typical Protestant crybaby bitches. But the Creation Research Institute, for instance, the creation research scientists, are the ones that did all the flood geology research. And if you don't know their research, it's because you've been brainwashed. You're pitiable. You'll never catch up with me. But if you listen to me, you won't have to catch up with me. So I'm telling you the result of a lifelong search for the truth. When did the ecology originate? It originated twice. And that's confirmed by scriptural record if you care. I do care. You may not care. I don't give a fuck what you care about. Only what I care about matters. That's the way it is. That's science. This isn't patty cake. This isn't let's be nice to each other. This is to get the truth so we can have the fucking truth. Well, that can lead to bloodshed. Let it. Let it. Oh, it does. It will. It must. It has to. But don't start it. Just make sure you put out the truth until you're killed. That's what Yeshua said to do. That's what he was told to do. You don't believe in Yeshua? Well, you're probably not human. I don't care. This has nothing to do with being a Jehovah's Witness, a Baptist, a Mormon, some God-cursed jackass retard. This has to do with whether you're a functioning human with a rational mind. Anybody who's heard of Yeshua regards him most interestingly, with great fascination, perhaps devotion, but respect, absolutely. You don't like Yeshua? You are immaterial to anybody's ever going to care about you. You're a threat is what you are. You're too stupid to live. This is to the death. This is the cage. I'm right. everybody else is wrong. That's how it is at this level. So there were two ecologies, which is recorded in Genesis. The first ecology was created by a team which is named. They're aliens. And that alone makes sense. So that's the right answer. Simply for that reason. There's no other explanation unless it was speciation. Not for the first ecology, no. It wasn't, well, it probably was, but it wasn't natural. It was supernatural. You can't form an ecology that's so complex and diversified with millions of species. There may have been millions of species before the flood. We're not sure about that. We don't have enough evidence. After the flood, there became millions of species. About 3 million. Some say 6 million. It's quite a way, because nobody knows everything about the ecology, not even how many species there are. But there are at least 3 million. About half of them are animals, about half of them are plants. So what I do is just narrow it down to an order. There are about 1 million plant species at least, and there are about 1 million animal species at least. That's impossible. That's ridiculous. But it's true. So how do you explain it? You can't. You can't explain it. Darwin tried, and he has a partial solution. Speciation is correct. But was it natural? No. There had to be speciation. He discovered that. Not for humans. Humans are not involved in this. This only applies to the ecology, the plants and animals. Did they speciate after the ecocidal flood? They had to. Is that in the Bible? No. Why isn't that in the Bible? That should be part of the transmission record from the beginning of time, that after the flood, the Elohim came back and re-speciated the animals and plants. That is what happened. I discovered that. I'm the first man to have discovered the actual solution that solves Darwin's dilemma. That the Bible is true, but so was Darwin. There was speciation, but it wasn't natural. It was controlled. Controlled by what? Aliens. Aliens, absolutely. And so you're going to accept that. Because if you don't, you're never going to know anything. I know it all. And if you don't like that, it's because you've been brainwashed to hate a guide. That's America to me. It's pansies. It's faggots. To use the old word, I don't want to impugn anybody and get into legal danger, but the old use of faggot and retard. You're a pussy. Well, you see, these are hate words. I don't like hate words, but in this case, they're appropriate. Either you listen to me, or you're out. So that's the truth. There was an ecology that existed for less than 5,000 years before the ecocidal flood, which was predicted by humans, that is two of them, Noach and Enoch. Noach and Hanoch are their Hebrew names. They have names in Islam too, which are very beautiful names. Nu, and there's a name for Enoch or Hanoch. Those are men who lived before the flood, who are cited in the Bible. They're part of the transmission record. Were they killed by the flood? Well, Enoch wasn't, because he died before the flood. And then there's Noah, who didn't die in the flood because he rode above the flood in the ark. And that's been proved. So you're not going to make fun of that. And you're not going to make fun of Noah's story like it's some childhood myth. It's the only rational answer. Because I say so. Because I can prove it. And I have proved it. It's just that nobody cares to listen. You're going to have to listen. You're going to have to listen, or you're going to have to kill me. And I'll make you kill me. This is just to show you the level of emotional commitment. I'm 71 years old and I couldn't care less if I live or die, except I have good instinct to live. So I don't want someone to kill me. I don't want anybody to hate me. But in science, you get jealous. You want to be heard because you know the answer. Well, oh yeah, really? Well, in my case, yes. So this is how you begin. When did the ecology begin? Which one? See, you had to go all this way to be able to ask that. So to wrap this up, to keep this under an hour, thank you so much to all of you who have been tuning in and continue to tune in. All 8 of you. Keep looking up. We'll be right back. Thank you.